I know just what you mean. Look, baby, I know just what you mean. How come all these rappers and these actors don't rap about what they see? Look, baby, I know just what you mean. Look, baby, I know just what you mean. Look, okay, let me start breaking it down. You're rapping like a clown just to talk about a town, and you're talking about a crown, but where'd be it now? You don't hold your people up, you always hold them down. See, I keep my flow immaculate. I don't write, I calculate. I make the beats, spit the rhymes, and mix and masturbate the fake to the real like we had a date. Yeah, I know I'm not the lace, so just keep it cool like Frosted Flakes. I'm all over the chamber when you bust them guns. Fake stay all over the place, they like to type and run. Fake stay winning the race, cause they the type to run. And you say he not real, but you both got a gun. Okay, well I won't judge you, but yeah, I held a grudge too. But don't act like a dumb you. See, the truth cuts you up like the plug do drugs too. So when you in the cell, tell me what guns do. Yeah, how come all these rappers and these actors don't rap about what they see? Look, baby, I know just what you mean. Look, baby, I know just what you mean. How come all these rappers and these actors don't rap about what they see? Look, baby, I know just what you mean. Look, baby, I know just what you mean. Shots rang out when the boys in blue bang out. We gotta do our thing now, just to get our slang out. I understand the sentiment, it's imminent. So move your body now. If you really got the moves, start killing it. We getting it, keep getting it. I rip the mic like single ply, wiping with a finger missing. You talking kitty flipping, that's why the kitty tripping. You got the kitties flipping, something you must be missing. I like my missus chillin', winning, spending billions. Holistic hindsight, she raising niggas, nigga. She like to pop it, she like to get it. So what he gon' do? I got you reminiscing back when I was in the future. Mic in hand, that's my tool. Broken grammar, fool of schooler to make your body mover. So the cast of this stupid movie never fool you. I threw the jewels to you. How come all these rappers and these actors don't rap about what they see? Look, baby, I know just what you mean. Look, baby, I know just what you mean.
Let's get it. What's going on, y'all? It's your boy DameSmiff, and we're here with another episode of Musician Talks with your boy DameSmiff. And so we're gonna have a great conversation today. We're gonna explore a lot of how the sex worker industry coincides with the music industry, right? And a lot of it is going to be learning, understanding, and more so giving tips and advice for our younger musicians and actresses and singers and instrumentalists and things like that to really understand what their choices are in front of them, right? So as we're exploring this conversation, just know we're here to learn, ask questions. So let me know in the chat if you have any questions or if you have any interesting facts you want to share, and we can probably explore them in real time. So if you like conversations like this, make sure you hit that like button. That's how we know, because it will tell everybody else that this is a dope video and they should check it out. And also subscribe to the channel so that way you can catch these live streams live in real time, and also join in on the conversation and catch my latest content. So sex work, what is it? What's going on? Why is all the news headlines and things like that covering it and things like that, right? Well, from my understanding, right, and this is generally how most people feel about it, prostitution and sex work and things like that are commonplace. They have been here. It's like nothing new. From all kinds of cultures and races and ages and shapes and sizes. Pretty much any kind of person you could imagine would participate or can participate in this kind of work, I guess you can say, okay? Now, what we're talking about today is how do and how can musicians find themselves in this kind of work, right? And it's important to understand that, because usually when I talk to people about being a musician or how they view musicians, specifically female musicians, there is a bit of sexualization that happens. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's kind of normal. But the issue with the sexualization is that it starts to take priority over the musical talent. Now, that can go two different ways. It can go either from the fan to the artist, or from the artist to the fan, where you see artists who generally just sexualize themselves over becoming better musicians, or you'll see fans kind of ignore the musical talent of an artist because they're so beautiful or sexy or something. So the reason this is going to be important to navigate is because for younger female musicians, as well as just novice, or maybe you just want to get into the music industry, no matter your age, this information is going to help you understand what it is that people truly perceive you as, right? If you are a super sexy artist, what people are really going to perceive you as, but then also provide you with the option of whether or not you really want to walk down that path, right? If you really understand what it is that you're getting yourself into. Now, again, as you know, your big bro, Unc, A&R virtual manager, record label guy here, I'm of the opinion that this should just generally be avoided if you want to be in the music industry for musicianship, right? But if you are going to do it, understand what comes with it and how much leverage you actually have, right? Because the shock to the situation, I think, is what most people find more annoying about anything. Like when people are participating in sex work and they're confused about the process, or let's say would like to disrupt and change what the process naturally is, there becomes a lot of, I guess you can say, controversy in how quote unquote vanilla people and the average citizen is supposed to navigate the sex work industry. Now, when I say it that way, most people generally understand what I mean, in that you know that a lot of girls want to get on OnlyFans for the quick money, but you also know that being on OnlyFans for the quick money is not the only thing that comes with joining OnlyFans, right? And then in the reverse, if you see like college girls saying, I want to dance as a stripper for college money or something, right? We understand that to be commonplace and a talking point and a trope amongst young women. But on the other hand, we also understand in common sense what actually comes with the stripper environment, right? Now, for those of you who don't know, we're going to kind of explore a little bit of it, like a tiny amount, right? Because our greater point is just to figuring out like whether or not this is even an option. But if you want to deep dive into that, we could probably do that on a late night at Dame's episode. But if you really want to go down that path, it really should be of priority for you to understand what that path comes with, right? So on the obvious tip, when we talk about the OnlyFans girls, people will say, well, think about, let's say, the stigma or status of it, right? The honor, purity, your integrity, and things like that. Outside of that, then you have people who just generally just don't like sex workers in general, right? Like, so maybe people will now think you're icky or you're gross or they can't trust you or you're a degenerate and things like that, right? Outside of those two things, then you get into the societal, let's say, network things. Like maybe you want to be a high status politician, or maybe you want to be a representative in a religion or something like that. Well, these positions come with a bit of expectation for the resumes, right? So thinking about these things, if we were to coincide it to the music industry, well, if you wanted to be a empowered, sexy, I don't know, super strong female singer who don't need no man, then that can be done through music. You don't necessarily have to use your sexuality to do that, right? But if you don't understand it that way, or if you don't see that as an option, you may find sex work as an easy choice, like just, you know, to do it. And it will feel empowering. You could have agency within sex work and actually find some success in it. But what are you actually risking by chasing that success through that approach? Okay. So we're going to take that look, because it's not necessarily, I would say, so stigmatized of a conversation that we shouldn't have it. But I think it's more of a conversation around, I want the ladies who are going to be getting into the music industry to understand that here, at least on this channel, we want you to prioritize your musical talents. Anything that comes with beauty or things like that are more of a health focus. That's not necessarily trying to, I guess you can say, validate your skills or anything over here. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And that's how we're going to walk ourselves through this concept together. Okay. So the intersect between the sex industry, law enforcement, and the music community is complex, involving legal status, the economic realities, and industry dynamics, right? And so what that really means is that there is actually a complex relationship between the, I'm going to speak probably for the rest of this video just so we can be consistent here. from the perspective of a female artist. But there is a relationship between how a female artist can be, one, on stage at a venue performing, which would then attract the attention of, let's say, clientele that would be available for people within an environment to then perform sex work, right? You'll see this a lot in conventions, usually big events that are happening in a country, like let's say World Cup, the CIAAs. You'll see like NASCAR events, Super Bowl. All of these big congregations of people provide just more opportunities for people that are sex workers to then have clients, right? So increasing all of that means that it makes law enforcement's job a little bit harder, but at the same time, predictable, right? So they'll understand where things will be, what to expect, and how to really set up traps. So we spoke Monday on how law enforcement is really doing their job on capturing perpetrators of assault and things like that, especially in the UK. So it becomes a bit more predictable. But with that predictability comes two different things for you female musicians. It becomes either a deterrent or a encouragement for you to join in, right? So if you're a singer and you know that eventually you can start making a little bit of notoriety with your songs, like maybe people think you're popular and you're cute, well, participating in sex work would look like an option for some of you. And it would be an easy option depending on your access to it or who's in your network and things like that. On the other hand, hearing that it's, going to be at certain venues that you may frequent, or that it heightens the presence of law enforcement, or that it's even illegal in the first place, might be enough for you to say, this is not an option for me. I'm not going to take that route at all. I'm going to choose a whole different path. And so we're going to explore why a female artist would choose and why a female artist would not choose, right? We're going to explore both. So let's look at the arrest ratios we see here, at least in the United States. According to the FBI Uniform Crime Reporting data, law enforcement overwhelmingly targets consensual adult sex work compared to human trafficking. In peak reporting years, arrests for prostitution-related offenses outnumbered sex trafficking arrests by roughly 38-1. So if I were to just use my brain nodules here and think about what that means, I would assume that means there's probably way more, I guess you can say, quote unquote, independent sex workers that are frequenting these, like I said, predictable environments, like maybe certain cities, certain events. And it's gotten easier for law enforcement to target them because they're predictable versus human trafficking. There's probably a heightened risk for people who want to participate in that. So there's way more tricks and clever things that they got to go through. So it's harder to detect, right? So what does that really mean, right? So what that means is that if you're a female musician, and by definition, just by the legal definition, you participate in prostitution on your free will, it's more likely that you will get caught for that crime than you would having to be forced into it through human traffic or sex trafficking. So now we're looking at a conversation that really is about agency, which means things that you want to do and things that you're a victim of. Okay, so now you'll see that with what we just said, that there's actually a higher rate of people being arrested for choosing to be sex workers than there are people being arrested for participating in sex trafficking. Okay, and again, you can look at it as a policing issue or a criminality issue, but either way, those are the stats that we have to work with, right? So while law enforcement in several jurisdictions has attempted John stings to target buyers, state-level crime data such as historical reports from state police units show that 65 to 70% of prostitution-related arrests remain focused on sellers rather than buyers. Now, I want you guys to put in the chat, who would you think are predominantly the sellers in prostitution-related arrests? Who do you think it would be? And the John stings are basically where they would either probably go like undercover and set up a John basically and then catch him, right? But it shows that 65 to 70% of prostitution related arrests remain focused on sellers. Who do you think are the sellers? Well, the sellers are predominantly women. So that would mean, if we go with the previous stat, if we were to hold that to be true, that means predominantly women on a 65 to 70% rate are being arrested on a consensual adult situation. They're not being arrested on a sex trafficking incident, okay? And yes, the chat was actually right. It was the women. So understanding that, ladies, that means that if you're a female artist and you see these kinds of behaviors in your environment, that you can now have your senses heightened on what is really at risk here, right? And then also for you ladies who have been offered or solicited for this kind of work, you can now see where the quote unquote sellers may predominantly come from, right? And this is usually a conversation you'll see in the little pimp documentaries where they're interviewing like pimps and prostitutes and sex workers and things like that. And they'll tell you that they will use women to recruit. They will typically use older women who look pretty, look successful, to kind of influence younger women or women who may not be in a similar situation or need some help or feel desperate and things like that, to then be recruited and participate in, which would be consensual adult sex work, not sex trafficking. Sex trafficking would be like, we just kidnap you and you're forced against your will. So that's why it's important for a lot of, at least younger women, to understand this concept, because it can bleed between what Larry June calls having a pimp or having a boyfriend that's just clocking some dough. So if you're a Larry June fan, you know that line is actually hilarious. But it basically means that there are situations where a female artist will feel as though she's in some kind of sex work situation and the legality will be true. But in order for her to really substantiate it, she has to understand that she's doing sex work, right? She can't think that I just pay my boyfriend's bills or I just do OnlyFans and it's just, poly or something like that. Like where there's men coming over and they're making content with other men. Like there has to be clear stipulations on what this is for you to avoid jail time, but also for you to understand what you're doing with your brand, I guess you can say, as a female musician, right? Now, I'm pointing that out, and it probably sounds crazy for you female musicians who are listening to this and they play like instruments for a living, right? Because instrumentalists are typically not the ones that are targeted for this. It's usually songwriters. Female songwriters are usually the ones that are targeted for this because they have less to lose in terms of the skill set. Like your skill set is really in your brain. So unless you have like a cajillion songs that are charting, 9 times out of 10, the songwriters that are women that turn to sex work are usually convinced because of their environment and their network. It's not necessarily such a great option over songwriting. They try to do it alongside songwriting. So you'll see situations, I'll actually pull it up too. You'll see situations where people will use female musicians' skill set as a way to market the sex work. And I'm gonna find a case real quick where one musician used the marketing of female musician talent in order to lock them into sex work. And I think he actually got charged with sex trafficking because a lot of them were doing it against their will, but it was under the guise that they were going to be promised some kind of music industry success, right? And so for you to avoid that, we would have to really understand, well, what does that look like? Like, how do you go from wanting to sing a song to then becoming a prostitute, right? How does that actually work? And as I explore this, again, this is not something where I'm like picking a side. It's more so just understanding, because as I have this conversation with people in real time, I'm usually met with complicity in the sense that we don't know prostitutes. We don't know pimps. Like, it's not like somebody in your house that's a pimp and you can walk down the hall and go ask them, yo, what's this guy talking about here? You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't do that. So a lot of this conversation comes from either one of 3 places: you participating in sex work, you looking at it online through a video, some third party way, or you're getting the law enforcement perspective where they're actually, solving for criminals and things like that. But there's a big case that happened where a musician actually misused his leadership and his influence through music to actually influence young women to get into sex work. So the case surrounding Atlanta rapper Cash Out. You remember Cash Out? Well, he's known for hit singles like Cashing Out and serves as a major benchmark in how law enforcement targets high-level third-party exploiters using enterprise and racketeering statutes. So, in July 2025, Gibson, which is the last name of Mr. Cash Out here, was sentenced to life in prison plus 70 years following a high-profile prosecution brought by the Fulton County District Attorney's Office in Georgia. So, as you guys hear that, if you've never heard of this case, what do you think he did? He got life in prison plus 70, right? The issue that a lot of men are going to struggle with this conversation is that men are usually complicit in the position that they play in the sex work industry because the Johns or the tricks or whatever are usually not as stigmatized as the pimps or the actual, we'll just call them pimps, the pimps, right? And what will then happen is that you'll see dudes who will turn to prostitution or look at prostitution as an option, whereas women who will then participate in prostitution look at prostitution as an option. So now the complicity for men are to say, well, if she wants to do it, then she's basically a consenting adult, right? And that's where you get the 38-1 arrest rate, right? So the complicity, like I said, in participating comes from two different directions. It comes from the fact that you can be coerced, right? So is that a reality? I need to know if you even believe that you could be coerced into this situation, meaning you could hear a sentence, you can hear a phrasing or be presented a deal or an offer and then be put into the situation. It's kind of like when you see missing people folders or flyers, you kind of think, oh, that won't happen to me, but there's someone hoping they can be found type of thing, so you can be coerced. That's one thing. On the other hand, you can also be, I guess you can say, taken advantage of, right? But most people will lean towards the you were taken advantage of argument, which is why you will see more stigmatization for the pimp than you do for the actual John or the trick, right? So in one hand, you're probably like, well, that makes sense, right? The John or trick just wants to go and just pay money to have sex with the girl. And then the pimp is the one, quote unquote, forcing the girl or coercing her into doing the job, right? Well, the problem with that argument and that complexity, or what makes that complex, is that all three people are willing participants. Like in general situations, based on the stats we just saw, the 38-1 ratio, consenting adult sex work means that the woman knows she's a sex worker / prostitute. The John or trick saved his money up to come spend it with her. And the pimp has a relationship with the woman who is then doing the actual prostitution. So now you have a situation where you can't say, oh, I was just paying, or, oh, I was just paying for school as a prostitute, or, oh, these girls say they want to be prostitutes. You can't do that anymore. And now you have a situation where you guys generally understand that this is illegal and you're still choosing to get into it, right? So this is the part where most men are going to struggle with this side of this, but generally, ladies, you kind of understand this, right? So prosecutors established that Gibson, or Cash Out, used his record label, Pyrex Music Group LLC, along with his musical clout and social media status as a front to recruit, deceive, and coerce women into commercial sex work. So they were able to prove that, but I can possibly argue that Cash Out believed he was doing nothing wrong. In his mind, right? Remember Monday, we covered that wild pamphlet that the UK dropped, which means that some people need to be informed of the information inside of that pamphlet, right? Well, it's my belief that if Cash Out were to do something like this, being that it takes a lot of work to get status on social media and to be successful in the music industry, it makes me believe that he never would have thought this would have failed. this was a goal from the beginning, perhaps. I don't know. I can't prove it. But law enforcement revealed the human trafficking and pimping ring was operated as a family-run enterprise. His mother, Mama Cash, and his cousin, Tyrone, were co-defendants who helped manage logistics and exert control over the victims. So sometimes when we think about girls getting into OnlyFans or girls getting into sex work, like a lot of the examples are Miami club nights, Atlanta strippers, New York strippers. You'll see people talking about Walking the Blade, Figueroa, and all this stuff like that, right? Arizona, big on it. All the pimping, right? When we think of that stuff, how many of you actually consider the fact that there's going to need to be logistics to exert control over the prostitutes or anything like that? How many of you actually think the control is similar to corporate America, where, you know, there's a paycheck and there's a schedule and there's an HR company and you got to make sure you're on time and things like that. And you get 3 strikes and then you get a meeting. And, you know, how many of you think it actually works that way? Or the first time you're late, it's probably a very harsh punishment or consequence. And in your mind, is it harsh enough? You know, how harsh do you think things can get, right? Well, let's actually see. The operations primarily occurred in hotel rooms around Metro Atlanta's Fulton Industrial Boulevard corridor. So right there, smack dab where everybody is. So remember what we talked about the predictability and where things could be, right? So if you're in a major city, a downtown hustling and bustling city, well, if you were to think like a salesman or a businessman, there's more opportunity here, right? So if I were selling anything, where would I go, right? So the Fulton County Industrial Boulevard corridor would probably be great. And it says, as well as residential homes. Prosecutors presented evidence of severe physical abuse, gunpoint coercion, false imprisonment, rape, and total financial control of the women. So when you hear those terms right there, now mind you, this video is about you being a female musician. As a musician, how many of these things that I just listed do you think would be a part of your work environment to write albums and sell records and perform on stage? Severe physical abuse, gunpoint coercion, false imprisonment, rape, and total financial control. How many of you ladies thinks that comes with being in the music industry? Like, that's a standard. So if you don't think that that's a standard, right, then it begs the question as to why a woman would choose to get into, you know, this kind of environment, right? Now, here's the idealistic thinking that most people have on this conversation. A lot of young women would believe that getting into this kind of work would not involve these situations, or there's a low probability of it, or they'll think that they can manage this kind of threat and risk. There's a big thing, at least nowadays, because of all of these charges, and we're going to see how a lot of these, how law enforcement actually catches these dudes. But there's a big thing now where you're seeing married men and women and boyfriends and girlfriends getting into the same work alongside people that function with these same, I guess you can say, elements of physical abuse, gunpoint coercion, and things like that. So you'll see situations where people are calling themselves swingers and they're online hooking up with people with their wives or with their boyfriends. And now you're in the room with a hotel with somebody who has been used to this kind of environment. They're not there thinking this is just swinger sex or because they like you. They're used to sex work, you know, what comes with the sex work environment, right? And then the other idealistic understanding of this is to say that, well, all pimps ain't like cash out. Well, no, they're not all like cash out. But what are the odds? What are the odds? If you're a young 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26-year-old girl, and you're a singer right now, and you're thinking like, man, I could, I don't know, dance at a club for a little bit. What are the odds that your manager wouldn't use any of these elements? Is it because the law exists? Is it because you haven't seen it before? Is it because you think you can stop it? Like what would be the odds of you getting into these types of situations, right? And so the response to that conversation can sometimes be, I've at least heard it before, to be said that, well, if I can't do it this way, I have no other choice. And that's not true, because the reason you're doing this is a choice. So that's the thing we're going to explore the rest of this. But let's actually dive deep a little bit more into the case a little bit here with Cash Out. It says that in addition to state criminal penalties, federal civil rulings followed in early 2026. A federal judge ordered Cash Out to pay $40 million in damages to a civil victim who sued over the severe abuse and trafficking that she endured. So not only is he in jail for his entire life, plus 40 years or 70 years, he has to now pay $40 million in damages to a victim. So again, dudes who want to talk all the pimp stuff and be all like tough smack a hoe and all that stuff like that, just know that this is at risk depending on where you want to be. This is in Atlanta. So depending on where you are, you can be this or worse, right? This prosecution represents a clear execution of state and federal law enforcement, shifting their top priority away from street-level workers to high-level pimps and traffickers, using financial and digital and structural leverage. Similar to how prosecutors have leveraged Georgia's racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations, the RICO Act against music collectives such as Young Thug and the YSL, prosecutors demonstrated that independent record labels can be charged as criminal enterprises if used to facilitate human trafficking or sexual exploitation. Okay, so when I hear that, what does that make me think? That makes me think, for all those record labels that have strippers dancing in the studio, be very careful about how she got in that studio and where that money is flowing to and from. That's all I would say. Now, outside of that, the other side of this argument is, I understand musicians want to be vibey and having women in the studios amuse and stuff like that, and dancing is part of, I get it. It's cool. But what part of that becomes a liability for what you're actually here to do, which is to write songs? Just keep that in mind. Understand that, right? So the case also highlighted how industry authority promises of studio time, career advancement, and celebrity visibility are leveraged as coercive mechanisms to target vulnerable individuals like young women and people who need money. A key point of this is, or a key point when examining power dynamics inside entertainment spaces, right? So for you ladies who want to get into the music industry, just know you're gonna need money, right? How you get the money is up to you, right? You can make, there's a million different ways you can get money out here. It's just flowing around. It's just not going into your pocket. But if you choose this option, it's possible. Like I said, some people are doing this with their boyfriend or girlfriend. Your boyfriend could land some years in prison. You could be traumatized. You could be dealing with people that you don't want to deal with, be left with scars, marks, and things like that aren't worth it, when all you really wanted to do was sing. There's a beautiful song by Nas wrote, I think, I Can. Yeah, I Can. And he talked about how he's seen that before. You guys go check it out. I don't want to break down the lyrics. It's going to take all the time in the world. But it's a very popular song where he explained how a girl can go from a beautiful singer on stage to just whatever is left over after these people are done with her, type of thing, right? So the music industry operates on a high income volatility, right? Early stage, independent, or touring musicians face irregular pay, zero benefits, and a high upfront expenses like gear, studio time. Traveling musicians tend to face paying for marketing and things like that as well. Now, when I think about myself, that's definitely true. Like you're pretty much coming out of pocket for everything, and it fluctuates. So a lot of your consistency is going to come in how you set things up, right? Having a job is one thing, but you're at the demand of a job. So you got to balance that, right? You want to be a UPS worker and the world's greatest rapper. How's that going to work? You want to be a full-time musician, but then have constant income. Well, how much of your time is going to be spent doing things that help you do that, right? So usually when I think about that, there's a lot of infrastructure that you have to build. that of which could be sped up if you have financial literacy, if your family is involved, if you do take some time to actually like educate yourself and just learn about these things, you can just find out what options are better for you, right? But in order for a lot of musicians to avoid this situation, they are gonna have to take the initiative to do these things, to learn about the industry, learn about money, learn about how to maintain better relationships, become healthier and stuff like that. The part that I'm seeing a lot of musicians struggle with is like, if I tell you you're gonna have to give up alcohol for 3 years if you want to work with me on music, how many of you just cringed? You see, like stuff like that is things that are what you're up against when I talk about that you can be coerced. You can be tricked into sex work. You can be one of these many victims that we see all the time because of how you make decisions and what you're triggered by, what you respond to and things like that, right? How many of you would actually flinch at the idea of me saying, hey, you have to be of a certain, let's say, marital status to work with me on music? How many of you would cringe at that, right? And these are things that you would not necessarily think about in general, but these are things when you consider powerful positions, like if you want to be a CEO of a business, if you want to be a politician, if you want to be on the C-suite of many companies, they consider who you are, what you are, how you make decisions. It's your resume, right? And so for musicians, it can be very easy for us to spend a good 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of our lives kind of just floating, right? Kind of just guessing, right? And for my life, that was me in after college, right? So in college, it was kind of like just letting college kind of dictate what's going on, right? And then when you get out of college, it's kind of like, okay, well, now what? What do I do? So for a good chunk of time, it was trying to figure out, do I get a job? Do I focus on music? Let me focus on a job. Nah, I'm not doing no progress in music. Let me focus on music. Nah, but I need money and stability. Let me try to do both. Now I'm burnt out. And then it's like, dang, but I got to start a family. And then you start a family and then you try to get some money. And then at the same time, you want to do music. And now you're juggling all of that, right? It's very easy for a lot of people who don't have, let's say, the foundation, upbringing, network, and backup, like people behind them helping them out and things like that, to allow them to try all of that and fail, but then at the same time to say, I'm not gonna take a shortcut, I'm gonna still stick to music, I'm still gonna make it work in the midst of, right? So for a lot of young girls, that's very difficult, that's very hard to do, and so we got to give them grace in understanding that it's difficult. So it's easy for them to look at, it's hard for me to compete as a rapper or compete as a musician in the world of musicians as a 19, 20 something year old when I gotta make rent or when I gotta like pay for school and things like that, right? The immediate problem is way more important than the end goal of what you're trying to be, right? So it's very easy for us in general to be coerced into these types of situations. So how would you avoid being coerced or, let's say, nudged and influenced into these situations? Well, the first idealistic step would be to have that foundation there, right? So if you're going to be a young musician that's a female and you want to be a pop singer or a star or something like that, having your family in that process is going to help. And we learned that from studying Lady Gaga's journey. Her parents were actually along the ride for her entire musical journey, like as a single digit aged person, like she was in middle school with her parents alongside her. So when she was a young woman singing in clubs and playing and performing, her parents were there. So she had that foundation of support. If you don't have that idealistic first step where you have somebody actually supporting you, then you're going to have to create the support. And this is where most people are easily coerced, because support is what you need, but it's also something that if I can offer it to you, you may easily grasp for it, right? So let's say you're a young musician and you're a female musician. And again, I keep reiterating that because I don't want people to think like, oh, I could just do that. No, don't put yourself into it. Just think just an average, just female musician out there, right? If you're an average female musician and you're trying to make it out here in the music industry, but you don't have, let's say, your family supporting you, and you also don't have a bunch of money to just dump into your brand. Well, you're going to have to develop this foundation. And one of the ways you're going to do that is your business model. So if you're in the business of music, you either sell music, write music, perform music, or a combination of the three, right? And there's a bunch of jobs you can get in between all those things, right? That'll allow you to make money, make a living, or make a name for yourself. But if you need the foundation to support yourself, the first thing you're going to need is a network, people, right? The first, I guess, immediate thing people think of are your fans, right? But your fans aren't necessarily investors. We have that a conversation a lot here on this channel. Your fans are people that like you for you and what you give them. Investors are people that believe in what you're doing and will get a return in what they see they believe in you, right? So what you need now is a network of people that believe in you, like you, support you, but then at the same time will invest into you, right? And that investment is what you can use as leverage to then make better decisions, right? So I'm laying it out in the general way so you can understand it that way. What you may hear from other people within your life or within your environment may sound like this. In one version, you may hear, you need to get a man. Some people might just tell you that straight up, like you need to get a husband or a boyfriend and use his money, his influence, and his work ethic to kind of help fund it is on your business. What they may sound like to young women is, if I get a boyfriend, he's supposed to help me with my business and I'm a singer. And so he's going to come to my shows and help me work things out, right? That can sound like that. That can work. The issue you're going to have now is understanding whether or not that man is an investor or your partner, romantic partner, relationship, or husband or boyfriend, whatever title you give him. The reason you need to make that distinction is exactly why a lot of pimps, or let's say, yeah, we'll just say pimps. There's really no other word I can think of, but a lot of pimps tend to use their influence and leadership position as a way to influence women, especially the young women, but we'll just say desperate women, right? So if you're in a situation where you need money, you need financial support, maybe you need just a little bit of financial support, not a whole lot. Maybe you just need the rent coverage, right? But maybe you need clothes, and coming with the clothes comes a bit of branding for your music. So now you're coming with cars and who's around you at the club and who's actually hanging out with you and who's, the who's are starting to notice you because of your network, right? But if it's built on this presence, on the precedent that the person supporting you is your man and not your investor, then that conversation looks very different when we talk about who's in control, right? So a lot of times when we talk to young women about this in the music industry, I know we had this conversation in college when our marching band, they split us up by gender and had this conversation about like, gender dynamics, culture, and like being respectful and things like that. But when we talk about the influence we have on each other, it's rarely ever covered on how you're supposed to navigate things that are good for you with good intentions. We usually just navigate things that are good for you regardless of the intention. So if someone's offering you money, that sounds great, right? But if someone's offering you money with the thought of something in return, you should think about that. You should take a second to think. And what it is you're willing to give in return should be very carefully considered, right? So let's think about things like when streaming payouts yield fractions of a cent per stream. Artists often need immediate, high yield, flexible income to fund their creative work to survive between tours and shows and things like that, right? Live music venues, underground clubs, and nightlife districts are primary focus areas for vice squad operations and law enforcement presence. Musicians performing in these spaces often face working in environments where vice stings or raids occur and can lead to wrongful association, harassment, or police scrutiny. Venues or promoters operating in gray market economies may blur lines between talent booking, hostessing, and commercial sex work, leaving artists vulnerable to wage theft or coercion. Now, this is the part where if you were to put this on a little podcast about dating, this point right here comes up a lot, where if you were dating a girl who sings at clubs at night is a hostess at a prominent nightclub in downtown. And you remember what we said about what downtown actually breeds as far as its predictability for sex work, consensual sex work. And then also, if you have a girl who is, a bartender or things like that, we know what the stigmas generally are with the talking points on dating podcasts, right? Is that she may be having promiscuous sex, or she may be, I guess you can say a sex worker for the venue in a way, right? Whether she's a singer or not. And the usual rebuttal for that is usually that women say they aren't, without some kind of like fruit of why they aren't, right? And so that creates, like they say, a gray market that blurs the lines between everything that people are seeing versus what's actually happening, because there's no actual proof, right? So what you'll find a lot of times is that you'll see, as a young girl, you will see a beautiful woman in her 20s or her 30s serving a hostess, or serving as a hostess in a bar. She looks beautiful and she's the light of the night and things like that, but you don't know why she's there. Now, as much as we can sit up here and err on the side of righteousness and say she's probably there being a wholesome person, just doing her job and going home, well, similar to cash out, what are the odds? We don't know, right? And so if we don't know, then we have to lean towards, okay, well, this is what I usually lean towards. Is this music related? Does this job have anything to do with music, musicality, making music, or selling music? If not, then I might as well not even consider answering the question of what are the odds, right? Just don't even participate, right? Touring non-mainstream artists frequently face sudden housing instability. So in the entertainment world, trading performative affection, like you see on K-pop a lot of times, trading housing, or trading sexual favors for a place to stay, access to a studio, or a spot on a tour bus, often termed survival sex, exists as an underreported dynamic driven by severe power imbalances. So here is where you'll see this a lot in movies. At least you won't really hear this, like they said, because there's too much shame in women who would say, I had sex for, a spot on a tour bus with a guy I didn't know, and you're talking to your boyfriend. Like, you're not going to tell your boyfriend that. But this type of thing is going to, again, add to the blurred line things, where if you have a girl who's a singer and she works at a nightclub and she's doing very, very well, what are the odds that she's had to perform survival sex? And will she tell the truth as far as like the shame that comes with it, or as far as her wanting to out herself as somebody who is willing to do survival sex on her own agency, right? So if we understand this, how do we avoid putting ourselves in this situation, right? Well, a big part of it is that you have to understand what survival sex is, right? Survival sex is, like they said, performative affection, right? You're not intimately, or I guess you can say full body yes, as we heard from Miley Cyrus. You're not giving a full body yes. It's more of a yes because, or you'll hear girls sometimes say, because the guy kept asking for sex over and over and over and over, she finally gave in and cheated on her boyfriend because the guy just kept asking. You'll see sexual favors for a place to stay. It can be 50 degrees outside after a show and the groupie needs a place to stay, but she don't have enough to make it to the hotel. It's very possible that she could think survival sex is an option. Access to a studio. Some stories where girls are just trying to be in the room with a singer, and the singer knows that, well, like cash out, I can pretty much ask for anything because all you really want is what I'm here to offer, which is access to a studio. So if you understand what survival sex is, then you'll know when you're in the situation where you're offering up survival sex. Just think about the times where you're in a relationship and some dude really, really wants to have sex with you and you don't want to. Why would you, right? Just once you can answer that question, then this video makes a whole lot of sense, right? So situations you would usually see are like pressure, capital investment, studio time, PR campaigns and stuff like that. We've seen that. And independent artists usually turn to platforms like OnlyFans, adult modeling, where you'll see a lot of female rappers here in America, sometimes you'll see the pop singers, but they'll start to take nude photo shoots, and it'll be under the guise of fitness or sexual expression and things like that. But what this really is doing is creating attention real estate for their brand as a musician, because they sell music. Okay, they're not nude models, they're not known for nude modeling, there are actual nude models with actual agencies, but their record label has hired them a nude photographer or a photo shoot, so that way you could pay attention to them. And then some of them would actually turn to full service sex work, where you'll see rappers actually just be prostitutes with a record, like with the record out, right? And so they do this thinking that it provides them 100% financial independency, free from predatory record deals, right? But the issue that I'm saying they think that it gives them financial independency is that it's not based on music. So if you were to take away the thing that is providing the income, then the music wouldn't be doing it. So the title doesn't fit. And that's the issue, right? There's usually coercion by powerful industry figures. We talked about this on Monday when we explained that pamphlet on how not to rape, right? There is a power dynamic that people believe in from both men and women. Some women believe men are so powerful that if he asks for sex, it makes sense to freeze up and be fearful of the moment. And then there's women who feel like they can fight in that situation. And then there's men who feel like they are able to impose their will upon women. And then there's also men that feel as though consent over everything is a priority, right? So things like executive producers will leverage access to money, distribution of music, creating pay-to-play environments where sexual favors are demanded for career advancement. Now, this is a gray area for a lot of women because it can look like this. It can look like one or two ways. The sleazy director walks in the room, unzips his pants, and says, "You go to suck it or not," right? We've seen that in the movies. You've heard that. It's gross and icky. The slick way, and a lot of dudes try to warn you about this, is that they will be your friend first. They will be your friend first, and it can take as long as he feels comfortable to string it along, but he will be your friend that buys you gifts. He texts you at night. He says, "Good night, my love," and all this stuff. He's really cool. And then when it's time for you to ask for things that a friend would ask for, like let's say it's a record executive and you're like, "Well, I'm a singer, you're a record executive, we've been friends for so long, can I get some studio time, please?" And he unzips his pants and says, "You're gonna suck it or not." You should not be shocked, but you are shocked. So in a way, what we're seeing here is that you can be coerced by the simplicity of the relationship, right? Because you have no actual expectations within your relationship. Like how I always tell you guys, you shouldn't be just platonic friends for no reason. Like you should be platonic friends with a reason, right? So if you have people just around you for no reason, 9 times out of 10, you don't know the reason. So if you can figure out what that is, you can avoid these situations, right? Sometimes you also run into things like unexpected expenses, like maybe your car breaks down, a gig actually gets canceled. That's a big one where, a big one. Sometimes venues won't pay or can't pay because, the show didn't turn out the way it was. And this will force artists to rely on rapid income avenues to cover basic needs. And also, you got to think about the long-term impacts of this, right? I don't know how many artists that got a arrest record for this kind of sex work thing, but an arrest under prostitution laws creates a criminal record which can restrict international touring visas, venue booking, and brand sponsorships. That means you can't go into certain countries where they know you are outright a prostitute. And remember, 38 times out of 1, it was consensual sex work. Okay, so law enforcement strategy towards commercial sex work operates across a spectrum of local, state, and federal priorities. So over the past 2 decades, tactical shifts, legal mandates, and policy enforcement has altered how vice units and federal task force target sellers, pimps, and tricks all at once, right? So let's see how they target each one. And this is important to understand, ladies, again, so you know what role you're playing here, because the sellers were predominantly women. The tricks, predominantly men. The pimps, predominantly men, but it seems like we all are involved in this situation. So if we got to understand what role we play, we got to know at least how we can avoid being in this situation, right? So federal statutes like the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act redirect federal dollars and law enforcement resources away from low-level solicitation arrests towards dismantling commercial sex rings. So they're not going to target, landlords making you pay rent. They're not going to target the 19-year-old that thinks she's slick by, having her teacher pay her $200, right? They're not going to target that. What they're going to target are the commercial rings where it's like a whole blade, where it's like a whole website. It's like, 10, 3, 4, 5 people all working together to just traffic multiple victims, right? Investigators follow money trails like wire transfers, cryptocurrency, that's a big one, and venue hotel processing, and digital footprints across adult advertising sites to trace networks back to operators. State and federal prosecutors frequently file high-level felony charges such as money laundering, conspiracy, pandering, and forced labor, which carry mandatory minimum prison sentence. Law enforcement often utilizes specialized victim advocates during raids to encourage exploited individuals to provide evidence against pimps in exchange for housing, counseling, and legal immunity. So, in a way, if they want to target the pimps, they're going to have to be on the sides of the prostitutes, right? Because they can't work. You can't look at them as the same if you want to target specifically the pimps, right? Now, this is usually, like they say, human trafficking, where you're forcing somebody to do something, or if they're clearly like doing it against their will or illegally, like they're underage. So when we think about the more consensual aspect, let's look at more so how they target the tricks and the buyers and things like that. So many metropolitan police departments have shifted toward reducing demand by targeting buyers rather than sellers. The rationale is that eliminating the customer base starves the market without criminalizing vulnerable sellers. So criminalizing vulnerable sellers, what do you think that means, chat? And again, this is the perspective of a female musician. So this is not just, oh, she's just a sad young woman who's gone down on her luck and needs to sell her body. No. What do we think we mean when we say criminalizing vulnerable sellers? Okay, we need to figure out what that means. Undercover female officers pose as sex workers in known commercial corridors or through online classified platforms to arrest buyers when a monetary agreement for sex is struck. So they have reverse stings, and that's a way you can get caught as a trick. So if you're out here looking for more than likely not a super young girl, but some little young thing out there, it's possible she works for the police directly and is tricking you. Municipalities publish the names and mugshots of arrested buyers, impound their vehicles, and issue severe civil fines alongside misdemeanor charges. So they try to really like stigmatize being a seller, because you don't want to be the person, like I said, complicit in participating in the, I guess you can say, pimping of a young girl's future, right? At least if you think of it that way, right? Some people think that young girl is choosing to pimp her own future. So that's why we read the pamphlet. We know what to think now. We read the pamphlet on Monday, so go check it out. Initiatives like Operation National Target coordinate simultaneous multi-agency buyer stings during major national events, such as the Super Bowl, to disrupt buyer demand. So, like I said, the predictability of where the buyers are going to be, where the sellers are going to be, it's usually linked with the congregation of the large masses of people, right? So now let's look at the seller side of things. Vice units conducting quality of life enforcement in response to business or neighborhood complaints often perform mass buy and bust sweeps, arresting street-based workers for misdemeanor solicitation, loitering, or vagrancy. Following the 2018 passage of FOSTA SESTA, Online platforms shut down self-regulated advertising boards. This pushed many independent sellers back into the street-based work or unvetted environments, increasing their exposure to police contact and vice operations. So what we see here is that there was a big push for, what was it called, Backpage, where a lot of, I guess you can say, young women were signing up on their own, and a lot of pimps were using it as a front to kind of say that this was kind of like a, I don't know, like a boyfriend, girlfriend, escort service thing. But really, it was just them just signing people up that they captured off the street or pushed into through coercion to be on the site to then sell to people, sell to tricks, right? So this actually pushed many independent sellers back into the street, right? So what that means is that the girls who got on Backpage thinking that, oh, I could just make some quick money, after a year or two, when they created kind of like a business around it or a name for themselves, and their fans are usually tricks, not fans of music, when Hostess shut down the site, how do you think they will understand making money? So it usually will push them into situations where they're on their own on the blade, and whatever comes with that happens, or they're actually put under the thumb or influence of somebody who would quote unquote understand the game better, right? And that game could be doing the exact same thing on OnlyFans or doing the exact same thing without a website through the hands of another person, right? And so that's why I said in the beginning or in the middle of this, you need to have the foundation of who it is you're working with and why, because you can do it with your boyfriend and your husband, and your boyfriend or husband can think like the people who didn't read the pamphlet Monday. A growing movement has led cities like Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York to deprioritize prosecuting consensual adult sex work. However, in jurisdictions maintaining strict vice enforcement, sellers still face criminal records that limit their access to traditional housing, employment, and financing. So you can see how I said it can be complicit for men, right? Men that want to participate with sex workers will face the ability to not, or the inability to get a house, get employment, and as well as the shame and the ability to make money. So their argument is that they don't want to be as criminalized. The sex workers are consensual adults 38 times out of 1, or 38 to 1. So they're arguing that they want to be decriminalized because they really, really do want to sell their bodies for money. So now where does that lay for you as female musicians, right? Well, what that means is that you are now in a situation where, in my opinion, unfortunately, it's an option for you where you would have to deal with those circumstances that, let's say, like somebody like a Cash Out would put you through. But it's fortunate that you have the choice, right? Whereas you don't feel as though there's no other option. So it's like a double-edged sword. But now here's where my opinion is going to lay. So after everything we just learned, I would say that the best option for you is to build that foundation, which means you're going to have to target and influence people that are investors and actually like you, right? Now that we understand what to avoid, but then at the same time, what you invest in yourself is going to have to be music focused or musician focused, right? Because let's say you don't want to be 60 years old going on stage. Maybe you do want to do this for a short amount of time, do really well, and then, stop music, or maybe just write and not perform. Understand that, and then make the choice on the approach, right? Maybe say, okay, I want to buy a house by this age. I want to start a family by this age. I want my husband to, another thing too, if you do want to get married, name the person you want to try and marry. That's the only advice I can give you. If you think your husband is just some, I guess, vessel that's just out there, that some dude's just going to fill up, it's harder to kind of pick a husband. But I would say if you're going to pick a boyfriend or a husband, pick a boyfriend or a husband and say, that's the guy I want, and then figure out, all right, what does he want, and give it to him, right? That's probably the only advice I can give you. Because if you just look for things that you need, pretty much any man could give it to you. And if they offer it, you can be coerced. I guess that's the theme of this episode today. So we're going to look at a few different videos. We're going to break down how all of this information actually comes together in real life, right? We're going to look at some old videos, some new videos, and we're going to really piece all of this stuff that we just learned together to really make better choices within the music industry. So let's get into it.
Well, it looks like Roxanne put the red light back on in AOC's district. Fox News cameras caught 30 pretty women on just one block offering sex for money in Queens. And they were letting it all hang out on a busy street riddled with kids and cops, and no one bats an eye. The dirtiest street in Vegas doesn't even look like this. We thought AOC was a fierce defender of women. These ladies are being used and abused by pimps, traffickers. Her constituents tell Fox this is normal in the district.
Okay, so we have to be objective in saying two things. He could be right, and then two, that video could be wrong, right? So if you were to walk around downtown, that's why I said the predictability of like the national events and being in big cities makes it easier yet complex. What that video showed was just general people, right? It wasn't like everybody was wearing the prostitute uniform. But what you're going to have to navigate as a female musician is that, well, at least what we talked about yesterday, how you dress shapes how you communicate. So what does a prostitute actually look like today in 2026? What does an actual prostitute say to a trick, right? And if you understand those things, then you can navigate avoiding the situations of being identified as a prostitute or misidentified as one, right? So for most women, they decide to usually, at least my experience, to do one of two things: to look at what they believe a prostitute is and walk the other direction, or they look at what they think a prostitute is and ignore the stigma that comes with being a prostitute. Now, one of two things are going to happen usually if you want to be a female musician in that situation. We get to really dictate which of the two we want to say you are as fans. You don't really get to say what it is you are. And the reason for that is because you're not providing us something that's undeniable, right? So, and I know for some people it sucks hearing that, but what it means is that if you look possibly anywhere near close to what a prostitute may look like, you may be one. Because what are the odds? So, and now you have to put yourself in a situation where your brand, your image, what you do, what you represent is undeniable. If it's any bit of doubt in what you're doing, people can run with it, and they can and will, and possibly make money off of you like this news channel is. And so, like I said, a lot of the women you've seen in that video were probably just women wearing knee-high boots, just wearing skirts, maybe just have curvier bodies, maybe got long hair and a ponytail. That's not necessarily the uniform of a sex worker, but it's not undeniable that any of those women were not sex workers because of how sex workers look today. So that's my only advice for the whole I can't wear what I want thing. You want to make it undeniable who you are.
Julie.
God. First of all, I love that Roxanne red lights back on. That was very clever for whoever wrote that. Anyway.
You don't think I write my own copy?
I definitely know you did not write that. Just giving creds to the producers. So anyway, but I have to say, AOC has no idea where her district is. I mean, honestly, and nor do the people who live in her district. They were actually asked and polled recently if they knew who their person was. They don't have no idea who AOC was. She doesn't care about Hispanics. She just wants the Hispanic vote. And that is the theme for Democrats. Democrats thought that they were going to win this election because all the Hispanics were going to vote for them, all the illegals, right? That's why they want the illegals here in order to get voted back into office. They are
Do you think
wrong.
she feels bad for the prostitutes?
Was she a form? No, she was.
Julie.
No, I'm only joking. I'm only kidding. I'm kidding.
She was a waitress.
No, no.
Okay, so right there was a prime example of how that gray market point came to light, right? She made a tongue-in-cheek joke, but there was a little bit of truth in why she made the joke. AOC used to work as a waitress, and in the entertainment industry, being a waitress blurs the line between whether or not that waitress has performed survival sex before. Okay, remember, we know what survival sex is. It's the sex where you just pay for rent, or you did it to help your boyfriend out and you didn't tell him, or, you know, all that stuff. You know, you kissed a guy to make the guy like you, but you didn't really want to go all the way with him, but it did get you what you wanted. sexual intimacy for survival or for, an outcome. Now, a lot of girls will tell you, and I, as a guy, they will tell everybody that that was just flirting, nothing to think about, nothing serious. But when you have a situation where you're advocating for it to young women, or in this instance, in this video, young musicians, it really doesn't really make sense as to why you would tell them to do that. Right? So she made that gray market joke about her because she served as a waitress. And so it's a tongue-in-cheek joke. But again, I just wanted to show you in real time that yes, people will take even a politician's old job and run that joke by because it's a possibility. And again, unless you're going to make it undeniable, and that, again, I know you may not like hearing that, people can and will do this. And so this will bleed into how you view yourself, how the people around you are viewed, like your boyfriend or maybe your friends, even your family, but all of it plays a role.
I mean, she's a lady of the streets. No, she's not. I don't think she has a clue as to whether there are prostitutes on the streets or not.
You don't think?
Really
You don't think? Because I think this is like the 7th time Fox has covered this.
Yeah, but she doesn't know what's going on there. And then they say that, she doesn't go back to her roots. She has no tie to Queens at all.
Where are her roots again?
I'm not really sure. Does she have roots?
I don't know.
I mean, aside from ones that you color, I don't know.
I don't know. Next up, there's a catwalk catfight.
But yeah, a lot of times when we look at these situations of like people just walking the street and stuff like that, like I said, it's probably really tough for police to navigate this kind of job because you got to use surface level clues like, okay, what does she look like? Then you got to talk to the girl. You got to figure out, all right, is she using the language that most girls use during dating, or is she really a prostitute? It's probably really, really difficult. And then same with the tricks. Is he dating or is he just super cucked out simping? Like, I don't know how, is he tricking like in tricking sense, or is he tricking in the colloquial sense? Like he just really likes his girl and is spending all his money. It's probably really hard to navigate. That's why we're making this video, so you ladies understand the difference. At least if you want to be tricked on, or if you want to be a prostitute, you know what you're doing. You're not surprised. So let's get into our next video here and see what is actually going on out there in the world.
We was guerrilla pimping, man. You feel me? A bitch would come up missing. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, this video. So this video went viral because this guy right here, he is either an ex-pimp, current pimp, or whatever. There's a lot of hip-hop podcasts and videos where they just pull random people in and start interviewing them. But this gentleman is actually explaining what specifically guerrilla pimping is. Guerrilla pimping is a little bit more rough, violent pimping, I guess you can say, where the prostitute doesn't have nearly as much control as, let's say, like a stag or a vixen's situation would be, right? So what he's going to explain is what happens usually in that video that we saw just now with AOC. What happens if a young girl decides she wants to join that without any foundation, without a boyfriend, without a pimp, and she just says, I need some quick money. I'm a little young singer here in Philadelphia and I just need a quick $300. Who's taken?
Pimping, man. You feel me? A bitch would come up missing. You know what I'm saying? For a couple of days, a couple of weeks, whatever you want to call it. Is she gonna come back correct? You know what I'm saying? We was dealing with dog kennels. We was dealing with cat food. We had a whole bunch of ways to get a bitch right. You feel me?
Okay, so remember we talked about Cash Out and his coercion tactics and using guns and things like that. What he's explaining are similar to that of what you would hear in chattel slavery. Animal kennels, animal food, which is like terrible nutrition for a human and stuff like that. And so he's explaining that these are things that he would do or has done or has seen women experience, I guess. We're not going to put it on him for legal sense, but these are things he is saying happens to women who are prostitutes and are experiencing guerrilla pimping. They're living like animals, similar to chattel slavery.
Like, you can't walk our blades and you're a renegade. You have to be paying somebody, bitch.
Okay, so when you hear you can't walk our blades, you can't be a renegade, you have to be paying somebody, what do you think that means? Well, for the vanilla person, you probably have no clue what that means, so I'll tell you. But for the average hip-hop listener who's heard like these little colloquial terms, they probably aren't held with as much weight as you probably appropriately apply to it. So what he means by you can't walk our blades means that you can't sell your body as a sex worker on the streets that pimps claim, which is usually the areas where there's the most traffic, most opportunity, and making the most money. Nowadays, you'll probably see most pimps literally walking with their girls or their hoes down the street, or driving up and down the street as the girls are walking, and they're just patrolling in a way, right? So he's saying, girls, if you're 19, 20, 21, or maybe if you're 50 and down on rent and you got a little bit of body and stuff like that, you can't just come outside and just start being a prostitute and a quote unquote sex worker, like AOC was saying, without paying a pimp. So how many ladies think that was the thing that's going on now? You thought ladies, from that 38-to-1 ratio, that ladies were just walking outside, just offering themselves, and just dudes paying? And how many of you actually believe that was happening?
You can't be out here selling pussy and you ain't paying nobody. You know what I'm saying? You can easily come up missing forever. You know what I'm saying? Like, this shit real. So.
And this was a part of the guardrail conversation I was having about Sidhu Moosewala and Tupac, where I was saying a lot of times you'll see people who want to be musicians. We're talking to the female musicians today, but they will enter into an environment that doesn't have the same guardrails as the music industry, right? And what does that mean? That means that as a musician, if I go to your city and I'm out of town and I do a show, that's just the music business. Like, the venue booked an artist that is popular and has fans in your city. They come in and do the show, get their money, and they get to go home. Well, that's the music industry. If you're a pimp on the blade and some random woman shows up and starts selling and taking the money out of the tricks who you were expecting to receive money from, apparently, according to this gentleman on this video, he's saying the guardrails are about as low as you can get kidnapped and go missing forever, which probably just means murdered, right? So going back to Cash Out's case, ladies, female musicians, those of you who want to be on OnlyFans and call yourselves sex workers, and I'm out here empowering myself, are these workplace environmental risks that you're willing to take? Or do you think these things should be applied as well to the music industry? Do you think like the music industry should just function like this? Now, the reason I'm drawing this correlation here is because the predictability part that we talked about comes from a lot of the lifestyles that we live, right? So if you go to a show, a concert, a hip hop show, what are the odds that this gentleman would be there? If you go to, a festival, what are the odds that this gentleman would be there? Maybe he didn't buy a ticket, but what if he's a block over, 2 blocks over? What if he's 3 blocks over? What if he sent a girl there to visit the show to solicit while he stays home? You don't know. What are the odds? Again, undeniability. How can you prove it?
Yeah, like burning bitches with cigarette butts, putting cigarettes out on bitches, all type of shit, man. Pouring bleach on bitches, making bitches bathe in bleach bath water, putting bitches in the shower, closing the door on them, turning the hot water in, making them call you daddy while the hot water on.
So, again, as I hear this stuff, I'm not shocked because I grew up in the 90s. But for those of you who are hearing this and you're like clutching your pearls and you're shocked, you should be, because this is not normal for the music industry, right? But there are a lot of young women who turn to sex work in the music industry, right? And again, he's describing a specific kind of pimping. So this isn't quote unquote all pimps, but the environment has higher odds of you dealing with someone like this. It's not like he's going to walk up to you with a gorilla pimp tag on his shirt and you get to say, oh, no, I don't want to work with you. It's usually, like he said, if you can just come up missing, right? So to think that you can just say no, like you're in a corporate job, or you can, fight it off or things like that, makes me think that you believe people are playing fair. Like, there's not situations where we've seen cases of young women in sports cars being shot at random, situations of young women being found missing at hotels, situations of young TikTok influencers being killed at random. Like, we don't know, again, whether those women participated in quote unquote survival sex or not. But we also don't know if they were dealing with consensual sex work. Again, undeniability, right? Now, I want to apply this over to the men just so we can have a little bit of balance in the conversation. This would look the same if you had a situation of a rapper going to a studio and everywhere he went to the studio, there was some kind of robbery or a murder or a shooting. Eventually, I would say, well, it looks like you're a part of the problem as a male rapper or artist. Okay, it would mean that it doesn't look undeniable that you're innocent. Okay, that's the key thing. So that's why the choices we make as far as like whether we want to go down this path are going to be very important, especially if you want to make it in the music industry.
You feel me? And telling her like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, man, from now on, I'm daddy. That's what you call me. You know what I'm saying? While the hot water running on her and she's screaming and all that shit. You feel me? So you got to break their spirit. You feel me? Once their spirit is broke, then you're capable of doing whatever with it. You know what I'm saying?
So how many of you hear that, right? And you're thinking like, man, that's crazy. I think a lot of what he's doing is wild. Well, how many of you think about how many women don't understand that that's crazy? Like they are literally just victims of the circumstance and they are just in the environment. Well, when you consider that, you also have to consider at what age most women are susceptible to that kind of behavior, right? And it's typically going to be in the early 20s, fresh out of high school, fresh out of college, that age group. They're usually green, meaning the father probably hasn't exposed her to that level of trauma to understand that it even exists. Like there's probably a large portion of young women that don't know you can get beat to unconsciousness, right? So there's a lot of people, men and women, that don't know how heavy a punch feels, you know? So until you're in the situation, it's very possible that you really don't understand what you're walking into, which is why I'm explaining it in this video. So now you can understand exactly what you may or may not be walking into. But I guess the telltale sign that I would probably tell people to avoid when dealing with a person like that in that video would be to figure out whether or not you really understand who he is, right? Is it undeniable, right? And I know it's going to suck to say this, but if you judge him for what he looks like, he's wearing a polo shirt. He's got a pretty clean haircut, black dude, young black dude, clean cut, right? But he's got like tattoos going across his neck. He speaks a certain dialect. There's a certain vocabulary he's using. And the chains he's wearing all represent things, right? So this is where the undeniability part comes in for me. I can't prove what any of those tattoos mean. I can't prove that any of his vocabulary comes from his upbringing or his actual lifestyle. And I also don't know what any of those chains mean that he's wearing around his neck. What's your judgment? What would you say he is, right? What would you then call him to be? And so for most people, you're going to find yourself dealing with people on a surface level situation like, oh, he's cute, so I'm going to just hear what he's saying. Or he talks slick or something like that. That's called game for a pimp. I'm pretty sure when he was, quote unquote, kidnapping bitches, he wasn't saying, and then I'm going to throw you in the shower later and just put scorching hot water on you until you call me daddy. And if you say no, we're just going to keep you there until you do it. Again, you can be coerced. So let's get into our next video and let's see actually how law enforcement deals with a lot of this.
And accountability is coming. And to the victims, we will never stop fighting for you. And with that, I'd like to introduce the Chief of Police for the Los Angeles Police Department, Jim McDonald.
Ooh, I actually want to restart this.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, as always, to the media who are here with us today to be able to help tell this.
Let's restart this.
I'm Bill O'Saley, head of the U.S. Attorney's Office here. Today, this morning, as part of our human trafficking task force with Homeland Security Investigations, IRS, and LAPD, we are announcing the arrest of 10 defendants who have either been indicted by a federal grand jury for trafficking or benefiting from sex trafficking of individuals in the Figueroa corridor. 7 of the defendants are related to our prior operation, Broken Blade, targeting the Hoover Street Gang. 2 of the defendants have been charged separately for sex trafficking, Kylan Young from the East Coast Crips and Dejon Williams from the Neighborhood Crips.
That's funny. I know a Dejon, but okay. 2 things I want you to notice, ladies. My female musicians watching this, learning a lot. two things. I want you to notice that the police know what a blade is, right? So again, predictability. They know where the stuff is happening. We talked about reverse stings and stuff like that. But I also want you to notice the organizations that they're naming. They're naming the Crips. They're naming the Bloods. They naming possibly people 20, 30 years old, right? So again, undeniability. If you were in the music industry and you want to get in there and your manager is a Crip, if your producer is a Blood or his family is Bloods, what is this organization doing? Can you prove it? Again, corporate environment. Let's move it to corporate. Let's say if you worked at Starbucks and you found out your franchise owner was a part of the Tren de Aragua, and every day you see him walking there, he's got all the tats and stuff like that, but he's super nice to you. But every day you serve coffee, you know that he's a member of the Tren de Aragua. Does that matter to you? Like, are you undeniably understanding that you're safe or that you're legit, you know?
Trafficked a 15-year-old victim through violence. Williams trafficked a 16 and 17-year-old victims as well.
And again, ladies, pay attention to the ages, right? The separation that we usually do with this conversation is to say that, oh, well, they were young and dumb. Nah, it's not the young and dumb sometimes. Sometimes a lot of these girls walk into these situations expecting something they didn't want, and then sometimes they are actually influenced. Okay?
As an adult through violence. A 10th individual, Kenny Ray Mann, also a sex trafficker who was trafficking 16 and 17-year-old girls, has been indicted, and he whipped, raped, and punched one of the victims in the case.
So even situations like, as you're hearing how they're treating these young victims, this isn't even normal in just everyday life, right? But it would be a thing that, again, if you didn't read the pamphlet from Monday, it might seem normal to do, or at least beneficial.
The last 11 months, my office has charged 25 sex traffickers with human trafficking violations, carrying 10 to 15-year mandatory minimum prison sentences. That's more than the preceding 5 years combined. Operation Broken Blade is the first gang RICO case for human trafficking brought in the history of the Central District of California. The indictment is extremely lengthy and it details out horrific facts of the case. There's tons of photos and images that are being displayed here on the TV. That's from the indictment. The indictment charges 18 defendants in 65 counts. 17 defendants are charged in a RICO conspiracy. 3 of those defendants, Armstead, Mountain, and Melendez, sex trafficked children as young as 14 years old. High school freshmen too young to drive, but who were forced into cars with strange men to have sex for money.
So when we hear this, again, the clutching of the pearls may happen, but I guess you can say the targeting of these kinds of victims are really going to be the problem, right? Because the environment that these young, I guess you can say men, it looks like mostly men there, the environment that these young men are designing for their victims comes from an influence from people before them. This is not like these men aren't just like, oh, you know what I want to do? I want to take a 15-year-old. Like, they're not doing that. It comes from a culture, a lifestyle, right? Pimping, trafficking, all of that kind of stuff, right? So they're actually committing what I guess the previous guy explained, guerrilla pimping. But if you were a 15-year-old girl and some dude says he's your boyfriend and he's providing you with, I don't know, money, gifts, intimacy, he's got a car, cell phone, and another big thing now, especially for the younger kids, he's the one with the gun that looks scary, not the other boys. You can be coerced.
That's the type of defendants we're dealing with today. These defendants recruited runaways, girls from foster care systems, and other vulnerable victims who turned to social media for affection, but these defendants ended up grooming them, recruiting them, and exploiting them.
Okay, so he said they turn to social media for affection. Now, ladies, I want you to think about all the times you turn to social media and aired out your emotions. Again, thinking about the environment you're setting yourself up for. We're looking at 15-year-olds doing it. But we keep hearing stories of all kinds of ages, races, and cultures going through this. It can be Indian women, it can be Japanese women, it can be white women, right? But these situations are basically stemming from these young runaways or desperate women looking for intimacy or companionship or some kind of network. Do you remember my main tip? It's that you want to focus on building that network if you don't already have one. So this lack of intimacy that these girls were probably having or suffering from was an easy thing for these guys to manipulate or at least use as a trigger point to get these girls either close to them, in their DMs, texting them, talking to them, whatever happened, right? So this is where that gray market thing comes into the play, where some people will say, well, why is a 15-year-old talking to anybody on social media? Well, as he explained here in the conference, there was a lack of foundation. They were either runaways, meaning they didn't have their parents to guide them on that decision. They were desperate, which means they probably, again, didn't have the wisdom of an adult to guide them through that decision. Or they literally were looking for something they were not intending on finding, which was probably a young boyfriend or something, you know? So again, if we say it that way and we explain it that way, we can give a lot of grace to the victims, but we have to be responsible for who we are as, I guess, musicians, but specifically female musicians in, well, what do I want from the music industry, right? If I want in the music industry to be respected for music, then if I go on social media, what am I going to get from social media? Like, what am I pursuing from social media, right? So you'll see some female musicians, they'll start to dance, they may twerk. Some of them even will just showcase their talents, like singing and stuff like that. But again, when I explain this to you guys, even for men, if you're just on social media, just posting your content, you're not attracting anything but attention. You need fans and investors, as well as a network of other musicians if you want to be successful. So 9 times out of 10, with this particular case, them 15-year-old girls are probably just on social media. If they were singing or dancing or whatever, doing anything musical, they probably couldn't figure out what to get from that, right? Nobody really explained to them like, hey, if you get monetized, you can make this a certain amount of money and things like that. Or if you do that, here's what you need to do. Here are the people you need to work with. Here's who you need to avoid. Like, there's probably, they didn't have that, right? But for those of you who do, and you still make this decision, you are still culpable or vulnerable to dealing with these exact same circumstances if you're not intentional. Again, being undeniable about who you say you are.
The first superseding indictment identifies 51 victims, children and young women who are physically and psychologically abused in an exploitation cycle for profit. Just this morning, we identified 5 additional victims as part of this operation, just this morning. And law enforcement is working with those young adults to get them services and much needed help.
Okay. And this is going to be another controversial point, but this is also why the, I guess, perennial conversation around body count matters so much when it comes to dating and women, because what these victims are going through is life altering. Psychological trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse, being kidnapped, experiencing these things, especially in your teenage years, are going to affect how these people function as adults, okay? So if they're going to then be 25-year-old women, 35-year-old women who have been sex trafficked at 15, we have to be very, very, very graceful in understanding what that outcome looks like, right? So when we have this body count conversation, this is a part of that conversation as far as the psychological trauma that comes with who deals with you intimately, right? And you're probably like, dang, why are you pointing that out? What does this have to do with female musicians? Well, female musician asking this question, you're going to have to deal with you're going to have to control who you're dealing with intimately in order to understand how you're going to function in your later years, right? How many, I guess you can say, female celebrities and artists and musicians, have a crazy track record of relationships? And then how many of those artists that have crazy track records of relationships have fruitful careers amidst all of the craziness, right? Like, really admit it, like all of them, from the ones you see on TV to the ones down the street that got a show coming up soon. Everybody is in the music industry if you're in the music industry, not just the ones we like. So now that we understand that, that means that these circumstances that are happening to these people, they can't undo it once it's happened. So joining this intentionally, you have to understand the risks that come with it. So if you want to, be a swinger with your boyfriend and you want to go to the hotel clubs and things like that, or if you want to be a singer who's got like a freakier side and you want to hang out around where the freakier girls are, well, the girls know that too. And so, again, you can be coerced. I'm not going to say it can't happen to you, but I'm just saying it can happen.
The victims in this case have faced extraordinary and horrific violence as part of this operation. This is how they accomplish the sex trafficking in Figueroa. They do it first through coercion and then through violence. As an example, one of the defendants bit off one of the girl's cheeks. He bit it out, her cheek down to the cartilage. She had to get hospital care and stitches to get that repaired. One victim was beaten with a Rolex watch wrapped around his hand, a pimp's hand. One victim was forced to engage in sexual activities. On the same day, she was forced to have an invasive abortion procedure. One victim was choked to the point of asphyxiation. One victim was thrown out of a car and carjacked with children in the back seat. Horrific. In addition to charging the sex traffickers, we've also charged the people who are benefiting from this horrific conduct down in Figueroa. One of those is the manager of the Stadium Inn, which is a hotbed of where the Hoovers and Hoover Associates sex traffic their victims.
Okay, so he explained a lot of those quote-unquote environmental risks of being a sex worker, or as we would call them in the normal world, crimes. But those are all the things that have happened to these victims that we have caught, right? So since this has happened, probably more, if not worse, crimes have happened to more, if not younger women in mass in that area, because it's a constant flowing problem of women participating consensually, 38-1, remember, and then also the people who are forcing them in on purpose, right? So again, we say it's happening to the consensual workers because if you're working as a renegade, it's a higher risk that other pimps will find that out and have a problem with it, versus you going into this saying, I'm going to be a hoe and go get a pimp, right? Very few women are doing that, right? So 9 times out of 10, you're just low on rent. You're just putting out Twitter, you come through, FaceTime me or something, come to this hotel. And then when the dude gets to the hotel and he's used to dealing with gorilla pimping sex work, you now in a risky circumstance because you're just trying to pay for some gear. How many of you have seen the famous movie Hustle and Flow? Remember that movie Hustle and Flow with Terrence Howard, Taraji P. Henson? Do y'all remember the young white woman that Terrence Howard's character was pimping in the movie? Here's some movie trivia for you. How did Terrence Howard get his first microphone? If you know the answer to that, then you also understand what survival sex is. You can see how that grown woman with full autonomy was still put in that circumstance, right? So now we have a situation where they're going to start detailing how they went after the hotel owners, the inn owners, the people who help facilitate the work. Meaning, if I'm just a lowly little 20-something-year-old, 9 times out of 10, I don't got my own apartment, condo, or house to start facilitating sex work and prostitution like a brothel. So I got to go get with the OGs of the gang, the Crips, the Hoovers, the Bloods, the Trin de Aragua, the MS-13s. I got to go team up with the OGs who actually been in the game for 15 plus years and got some money and use their resources, which is more than likely either going to be another gang member or just somebody who's complicit in knowing that they're helping gang members traffic young women like this.
He's charged with knowingly benefiting from sex trafficking. The manager, Ahir Mukesh Kumar, admitted that up to 90% of the rooms he rented at the Stadium Inn were for prostitution.
90% of the rooms he rented at the Stadium Inn were for prostitution. Now, if you know, now that we know, that 90% of the rooms were for prostitution, do you think he had an uptick if there was a national event in the city?
90%. He keeps half of the proceeds.
He keeps half of the... Come on, ladies. We got to make better choices. We got to make better choices. We got to fight against this. This is crazy.
From those activities. He's making a lot of money off the exploitation of these young women. He's even admitted to having parents, or their parents came looking for missing children at his motel, but he continued allowing these activities to persist. Mukesh Kumar said he would rent to anyone who has the ability to pay, regardless of their intentions. He didn't.
Okay, so as you guys hear this, right, you're probably thinking like, wow, that's crazy. It sounds like a horror movie. I talked about this before, where horror movie tropes come from a place, right? So again, just like I brought up in the body count conversation, these children essentially are being trafficked in a hotel, and all the while the owner of the hotel knows that they're children, knows that they're being trafficked, looks at the faces of the parents looking for the missing children, and then turns the parents away. Now, you would think this was happening in a fucking Hogwarts movie or like a horror movie, but no, this is happening in the United States within the past 10 years, okay? So, ladies, the idea that this can't happen needs to be dispelled, okay? The other thing is that the idea that this is difficult to do needs to be dispelled, because he said 90% of the rooms in the building were used for prostitution, which means all the cameras saw all the things and it did not matter, okay? So if you were to book at that hotel as a single musician and you got a show that night, you don't know what you're walking into unless you know what you're walking into. So the idea that, I don't know, one of these gorilla pimps sees you in their city making money, do you think he's going to see the difference between the girl he sends out wearing knee-high boots and a mini skirt and you wearing what you're supposed to wear on stage? Do you think he's going to be able to tell the difference? So again, these are things to think about. Very important things to think about.
Not care. What I want to say is this case represents some of the worst defendants our prosecutors interact with and prosecute. It's horrific. But what I will say is that the work of the men and women of LAPD and the federal agents represents the best of the best in law enforcement. These men and women literally saved these women's lives. They saved the lives of these young children and young adults there in Figueroa being extorted and exploited. And so
so now the other conversation we got to have about hip hop, at least, because this is Figueroa, right? I'm assuming this is probably all kinds of people dealing with these kids, right? Now we got to figure out, all right, so when we hear pimps talking about the bitches and hoes and what they gonna do and what they not gonna do, how old are the girls they really talking about? Like when you hear a pimp going like, yeah, and I told the bitch to fly here and she's in the airport moving packages for me and she my little hoe and all this stuff. Do y'all think they're talking about 35-year-old women? Do y'all think they're talking about like 27-year-old women? You know what I'm saying? Like who do you think they're describing, right? Because then when you think of the reverse, the female rappers who talk all the pimpy pimp stuff, do you think they're talking about grown men? Like 35-year-old men, 45-year-old men? Or you think they're talking about young boys? Like what is really happening when we hear these lyrics in this conversation and hear about this culture, if this is who we're arresting, right? Now we know there's adults that are in prostitution and sex work, right? But we're not hearing it in the music that way. In the music, we're told that it's only all the pimps got the baddest little bitches and cooking bed and breakfasts and all the little colloquials and stuff like that. We hear all that time. But who were they actually talking about? You remember the undeniability part?
We are very proud to stand with LAPD in this operation. This is this activity should not happen anywhere, let alone in a fine city like Los Angeles. And we will work with our partners to eradicate these activities, and whatever support LAPD needs, we're going to give it to them. The best support we can give them is locking up these defendants for a very long time so they can never do this again in the near future.
So even if you like book a hotel, right? What if you booked a hotel and you pull up to the venue and you starting to park your car and you unloading your equipment and you see HCG sprayed on the side of the parking lot wall? Would you not think that there was like a gang there, human trafficking, sex trafficking, anything like that going on? Would there be no consideration for that? Would we be wise enough to avoid those kinds of circumstances and things like that? And I think for many people, it's a if you know conversation, but then there's also the straight up, no, I do want to participate conversation because I'm low on cash thing, right? So let's actually take a trip down the road of seeing how and why a woman would choose to get into sex work after everything we just learned, after everything. So just consider what survival sex is, consider what actual prostitution and coercion is, think about what it is you actually want from this occupation and this job. And then I also want you to think about stability. That's the primary word here, stability.
My goal was to move out. I wanted to create a sense of stability and safety and peace for me away from my parents because...
Okay, we got to stop right there because that was already crazy. So after everything we just learned, right? You remember my first rule? You got to have a what? Solid foundation, right? Solid foundation meaning that village of people who believe in you and are investing in you. Who would that be if you had no one else? Your parents. Oh my gosh, your parents. So we already hear out the gate, this girl wants stability from outside the foundation she was granted to from birth, right? So for some people, when they hear that, they're like, well, the only reason she's doing that is because her parents suck. Well, you got to remember, guys, being a sex worker today is 38-1 a consensual choice. So if her parents were telling her, I don't want you to go down this path, but I want you to go down this path, that's not her being pressured. That's not her being oppressed. That's her being rebellious, okay? Because it's a 38-1 chance that she's choosing to do this because she wants to do this. Now, how many of you think that she's going to find stability in sex work outside of her parents' upbringing? I don't know. Let's see.
There was a point in time where I felt as if they wanted to kind of keep me there at home. And although they wanted to keep me at home, I found it to be kind of controlling. Like, if you leave my house, you won't ever be able to come back. So just know if you ever move out, you can't come back. And I was like, interesting, like, word choice, you know? And there was just certain things where I was like, I really want to be able to, like, branch out and do what I want to do in the world without having anyone tell me or limit my beliefs or limit what I can do for myself.
Okay, we got to stop right there. This is where I see a lot of female musicians suffer from. She's not a musician, but the thing that I see a lot of female musicians suffer from is they see all the quote unquote guardrails of the music industry, like seeing specifically what it takes to be successful, but then want to go against it and then reap the benefits of being successful. That's what she just explained to everybody who was listening to her, right? She was basically saying, I want to be able to do what I want, whenever I want, whatever I believe. But what reality will teach us is that if we do whatever we want, we have to receive what comes with it, right? We can't choose what comes with it, right? So for her parents, that was their first lesson, to say, if you choose to leave from under our leadership, you get what comes with it, which is the ability or the inability to return. She didn't like that. She wanted to have the ability to leave from under her parents' supervision and have the ability to return and still gain their grace. Now, some of you may agree with that. Some of you may think that your children can do anything they want in the world and nothing should happen to them ever, as far as what comes with their decisions. But remember what we learned about the dude who was putting girls in the shower, making them call him daddy, in dog kennels, eating cat food. Those women felt as though they could go outside the guardrails of, let's say, walking the blade freely. Well, the response to them is what they had to deal with. There was no protection from that response, right? So we'll see how this woman navigated that as far as disregarding what her parents wanted for her, at least.
And so I remember getting 12 envelopes, and I was still living with my parents at this time. And I was going to this cam studio every day. And I was starting.
A cam studio, for those of you who don't know, is a webcam studio, which is like a room with a computer and a webcam, like a library, where you chat with strangers, or usually men, that want to flirt with you and talk sexually to you. So I don't know how old she is doing this, but people were doing it as young as like 16, talking to 16-year-olds. And there's one lady that went viral saying like dudes were asking for like creepy things. So she's getting up every day, leaving her parents' house on purpose, going into this studio, logging in. And in the midst of this, I guess her parents don't know.
To, buy things on my own and do all these things. And I told myself, I'm going to get 12 envelopes and I'm going to put $1,000 into each envelope. And I did that. I managed to save up $12,000, put $1,000 in each envelope, and then I created an Amazon wish list and I put it on my webcam platform site.
The porn site that she made for talking online. She basically made $12,000 talking online as a webcam sex model, and she saved it up, and now she made an Amazon wish list.
And I had people buying me furniture, like bed frames, nightstands.
Okay, you remember the coercion side of things? She says, I had people buying me things, right? So in her brain, these gifts come with nothing. In her brain, this is her basically getting a paycheck from corporate.
Like microwaves, like bedding, shower curtains, all the essentials that I would need essentially to move out.
You picked out the items that you
move out of her parents' house, who already had bedding, microwave, furniture, and things like that.
liked on
a wish list.
On a wish list, and
yeah,
your clients or fans, or you call it, would purchase them for you.
Yes.
And they get delivered to your place.
Yes.
He's so slow. So essentially what we seen here was that in her mind, doing that was a sense of empowerment. She earned agency because she was doing, I guess you can say, online work, right? Under her parents' house. Now, this is the part that I guess most women are not going to like to hear. But again, when we go back to this body count conversation, pimps, boyfriends, husbands, all of that stuff have a symbolic representation to the hoe, the girlfriend, and the wife, right? And what that representation typically is that the girlfriend, hoe, or wife looks up to the pimp, husband, or boyfriend, right? And look up in the sense of what kind of leadership would he provide for her, right? So if the gorilla pimp wants to beat on the girl for the money, she has to be submitting to that through violence, right? If the super smooth pimp is just coercing her because he's got charisma or game, she has to not be susceptible to the game in order to not be his hoe. If the boyfriend protects, provides, and loves her, she has to say, I want that man to protect, provide, and love for me. If the husband says, I want you to have my last name and I'm going to provide, protect, and love you, she has to then say, I do, you know? So what she's showing is that her parents laid out whatever they laid out for her, and she rejected it for freedom, right? So now that she has the freedom, what she's up against now is all of the guardrails that come with having said freedom.
Started off as a dominatrix, Mistress Lexi, and I was 18 years old, this dominatrix, and...
So first of all, an 18-year-old dominatrix. We just seen 15-year-olds getting trafficked by pimps, but this girl left her parents' house to go be an 18-year-old dominatrix. Now, the reason I'm pointing it out this way is because she's 18 years old. Who do you think, chat, would be her clientele? Right? So when we look at musicians, we don't really think this deeply about our fan base. We usually just be like, oh, you like our music? You're a fan, right? She's doing the exact same thing in sex work. So understanding that, putting a business hat on here, who would be the clientele to an 18-year-old dominatrix? Like, what kind of domineering persona would an 18-year-old blonde white woman really actually have without thinking a certain, without the client having to say, well, I want to submit to this, right? Again, clear choice being made here. So
I was doing that for a while on cam.
And on cam could mean one or two things, because the sex worker industry has become, like we stated earlier, a gray market, meaning she's on camera doing what? Calling herself a dominatrix at 18 years old, right? We don't know what that means. So blurring that line makes it easier for both her and probably her clientele to participate. Because if we were to actually say that this 18-year-old girl was going to hotels, meeting older men, and then acting like a dominatrix to these older men, and then walking out of there would be a lot of safety risks that people would be considering. But since she said on cam, we don't know if she's going to hotels, setting up a camera with strange men or other sex workers and filming that way. Is she in a studio? Again, the undeniability part is all the way up in the air, right? So for a lot of girls, when you consider this conversation, it's very easy to wind up doing what she's doing, but it actually is survival sex. You're paying bills. Like, you're not in a business. You're not doing it for art. You're not doing it as entertainment. You're not doing it for fun. It's survival sex. It's a job.
That was so fun. And then obviously, like, the other, like, one-on-one virtual sessions with different people. I find it to be so intriguing to me that there are so many different people on this planet, and they all have, like, different kinks, fetishes, and whatever else, you know, and I'm never here to judge them for that. You know, we're both consensual adults in a safe environment where it's, like, controlled, you know.
When she says it's a safe environment and controlled, remember this, ladies, we just got done seeing the 15-year-olds get punched in the face, and dude just explained what gorilla pimping is. When she says safe environment, this is where the usual make prostitution legal crowd comes in. Her version of a safe legal environment has a major corporation funding the payment processing, but also she's online. Like, the safe environment that most women would desire as sex workers would really involve an entire porn studio with security. But because she's soliciting herself to strangers online, her concept of a safe environment is digital. It's not real.
And at the time I was like, I can shut this down. Like, I can turn off the computer, I can turn off the screen, and...
Can you actually shut it down, or will there be
Well, for me...
So that's a great question from the interviewer. He actually picked it up a little bit. The new data is showing us that no, you can't just turn the computer off anymore. And that's what I meant by, in her brain, the safe place is not real. It's made up in her head. Because what a lot of sex workers are dealing with now is DCMA, copyright strikes, a rack of bootlegging and leaking that's happening now. So the women who are doing this independently, where you don't have a brand, where it's just some username you came up with and you've just been uploading videos, 9 times out of 10, you're making way less money than the people stealing from you, even after you turned off the computer or deleted the account, because the machine that you're now participating in is bigger than what you're willing to fight for, right? You're here, like she said, she just wants to buy some furniture on her own. She don't even have no business plan, at least going into it. So when people think about that, they're like, well, I don't really want to work as hard as like running the analytics of multi-million view media company. You don't want to do that. You just want to perform, which in the music sense would just be getting on stage. But for a lot of sex workers, it seems to be that their goal is to just do the work of sex and not run the business, right? And so now you have to deal with all of it that comes with it, which is the cybersecurity risks, which comes with the stigma after you turn the camera off, which comes with the safety risk of who you are and all it represents, right? But if you tell this to her or someone like her to say, hey, you should delete your account, get someone to manage your content because you're not managing your content. And actually, if you want to build some kind of like catalog, upload through a distributor so that way you don't have the headache. But if you tell this to her, the idea that she's going to lose her status, or she's going to lose the little bit of income that comes with this process, or she's going to lose the agency and control to buy furniture through her fans and things like that is gone now, because now you have to go through your distributor, quote unquote, your record label, to actually get what you want, and they can make deals for you. But again, if most women are going into this independently, 38-1 consensual sex workers, this is a really tough argument to give to them. That's why whenever I tell people that they want to become independent musicians, that 9 times out of 10 they're not built for it, it's offensive. Like, because the same logic here applies here. Like, if you just want to just upload anything on OnlyFans, you can do that. But if you want to actually build a business model, you got to stop thinking the way you want to think. Like, you got to start planning and have an actual result and not just hoping and wishing. And
I was really introverted, and
you can't do cam work as an 18-year-old dominatrix and then tell me out your face that you were introverted.
Middle school and high school. And when I graduated high school, I think that nobody ever expected me to become like the adult entertainer that I am today.
Are you more comfortable in a private studio than you are like working in a strip club or something like that?
Interviewers. If you're going to interview people and you got a question, here's a tip. Say the whole question in your head and then say the question. Because if you go, this while you're trying to, give a question, it can, be exhausting. So that's why you got to practice talking, reading, and sometimes, I don't know if he's nervous because she's cute or something. I don't know what's going on with bro, but bro, you gotta learn to ask the questions.
Today, I'm comfortable working at a strip club and a studio. I don't necessarily cam all that much anymore.
Okay, when she started this off, she said she wanted stability. Why do you think she's not camming anymore? If she made $12,000 as an 18-year-old, I would assume she'd make a lot more if she stuck with it. Why do you think she's not camming anymore?
Now I dance on occasion, and I do escorting. And
she's an escort that dances now. Where's the stability?
In Phoenix, Arizona, and a few different other cities.
So you've come out of your shell.
Yeah, we've kind of... Because there was a time where I remember going to the strip club for my first time. And I remember being like, I want to try dancing, because I was webcamming for a while. And I wanted to be like, I wanted to go to the club, and I remember telling myself, like, you're so introverted, you're so quiet, like, how are you going to even make this possible? Like, you don't even like talking to people in real life. Like, you're able to sit in front of a camera and, like, get to know people and be intimate and, like, do all this stuff, but then when it comes to communicating with people in real life, like, you get shy, you get quiet, you get nervous. So I was like, I really just want to be able to be comfortable, like, with that. And
okay, ladies, how many of you relate with what she just said? That's why I let that play, because this is how a lot of female musicians get into sex work. They think that expressing yourself sexually is some kind of peak version of being an extrovert. peak version of being a socialite. Where do y'all learn that from? I don't know where y'all learn that from. But anyway, what she's saying, though, has very little to do with business acumen or business skills. She's suffering from this kind of like internal self-esteem issue about how she feels about extroverts and wanting to be extroverted, to where she thinks that becoming a sex worker or a stripper or quote unquote dancing, this is why I'm using the female musician side, dancers suffer from this a lot, where she thinks that dancing is going to help her be extroverted and be able to talk to people. So I don't know where y'all get that sexuality is going to be like peak, you know, networking for either working with more men, making more money or things like that. I don't know where that comes from, especially for the younger women. I don't know where that comes from.
I was like, let me just go to the strip club and see what this is going to be like for me. So I drove there, and I remember my first time driving there, I drove all the way to the parking lot. It was a 30-minute drive. And I got into the parking lot, and I just sat there. And I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. Like, I'm so scared. And I remember seeing these girls walk in, and I was like,
I don't understand what she's afraid of if the only thing she's afraid of is being introverted, right? We talked about people getting kidnapped, people being drugged and hauled off in the darkness, being assaulted, people being beat up, girls getting put into trafficking and pimping, and she's not naming any of these things. She willingly went out of her parents' house after webcamming because she wanted to dance in front of people naked, and she thinks that's going to help her with talking. Right? And I'm only highlighting it this way because I want to show you that you can be coerced. Like, there's nothing she's asking for in terms of what she's explaining to us as the facts given to us that would lead me to believe that she's asking for anything that people would work hard to give her.
I don't know why I'm so intimidated. Like, I don't want to do this. I'm nervous. And so then I left and I didn't go because I was like, I don't want to do this. And then the second time I went back, and I was like, I did the same thing. I drove 30 minutes, sat in the parking lot, and was like, oh. I was like, girl, you can't. You're not going to be able to do this, like, at all. So the third time I went back, third time's the charm, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go in. Like, I'm just going to go in. I'm going to apply, and we're going to see where the night takes us.
And so when people have this complicity about, like, young girls getting into the industry, this is the example most people will use. The young girl who had 3-fold tries, her parents, and all kinds of examples of not doing this, she still wanted to do it for whatever reason she chose. For this girl, it was because she just wanted to prove that she can dance naked in front of people, I guess. I don't know why y'all think that is super important to twerk and dance naked or whatever, right? So, female musicians, how many of you hear her story and can relate? How many of you think, like, the same story about, I don't know, just going on stage and singing for church or something like that? How many of you feel nervous before you go and perform? Well, this girl took it upon herself to do the exact same thing that you may have felt, or took what the exact same thing that you had felt and apply it to sex work, right? What you may see a lot of women around you do is applaud her, but then shame you because you choose not to participate in sex work. And then in the reverse, some people would actually shame her and then applaud you because she got into sex work. But I'm showing you that there are options out here, but I'm pretty sure, at least in my own opinion, that the work environment for a female musician is way better than that of a sex worker or a prostitute. So I'll let you make the choice because it is the United States. And just like that young white woman right there, you could go right against everything I just told you. But this was Musician Talks with DameSmiff. I hope you had a great one. We're bridging the gap between a lot of different heavy topics this week. Next week, we're going to dig into more of the engineering and architectural side of things. But this is a great talk. I will see you guys in the